Welcome back to another episode of GSA Does That, the podcast that uncovers the stories behind the federal agency delivering effective and efficient government. I'm executive producer Max Stempora, filling in for our normal host, Rob Trubia. In this episode, we're diving into the world of artificial intelligence. With AI appearing across the web, applications, and even smart devices, these new tools are primed to be a game changer. As we approach the 1-year mark on the executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, come with me as we discover what GSA's been up to on this front. Joining me today is GSA's Chief AI Officer and Data Scientist, Zach Whitman. Zach is relatively new to GSA, but has a history of digging into data and getting the most out of it. We're going to dive into the benefits, risks, and challenges that AI bring to the workforce. Before we get going, remember that this podcast is available on all major platforms, so please be sure to follow, like, and leave us a review. For more information about this episode and others, visit us at gsa.gov/podcast. All right, with the housekeeping done, let's get into it. Zach, welcome to the show. I know I've been looking forward to this one, and I can't wait for our listeners to learn a little bit more about you and what you've been working on. Reading your bio, it looks like you've worked across government and private sector. You have an interesting educational background from what I've read. You have a doctorate in hazard and disaster management. That is an absolutely interesting degree, and it makes me curious, how did you end up at GSA doing what you're doing? Can you tell our listeners just a little bit about your journey and how you got started?
Yeah. And sometimes I have to remind myself how I got here. So I don't think it's unfair for us to walk through that. So hazard and disaster management. My background was originally in the physical sciences and how they interact with people. The idea being if an earthquake hits, what is the socioeconomic impact of that earthquake? How does it affect communities? And what can we do to prepare for them better? So with that, it was a lot of like geospatial statistics, things like forecasting models and event prediction. That took me into the commercial sector first and foremost. I was brought on to work with Deloitte as part of their advanced analytics practice. And we largely focused on problem sets that were spatially significant, how things happen in space and time. And I would move around a lot within the federal workforce, going to agency. We were a small practice that would do very focused problems, and then we'd be moved over. So the good part about that was I got a lot of breadth of different types of projects, but the bad was they were very short engagements. We never could stay for very long after we did the analysis. And I was always hungry to see things through. Like we would come in and we would, try to figure out a problem, and, a few months later we'd have to leave and we wouldn't get to see, how that actually turned out. And so I was always looking for longer engagements wherever I could. And from there, I ended up bumping into the Census Bureau a fair bit, being in spatial and having a strong bent on geography. We would ultimately work together. My mission taking one step back because I think it's important. In a lot of the projects, be it public sector or commercial, what we found was that the answers that we were able to provide were oftentimes limited by the availability of the data and the quality of that data. And a primary source for all of these data were coming from governmental agencies primarily. If you want to figure out where best to optimize like a cell tower network, usually you'd have to rely on state or municipal data sets to figure out what kind of built infrastructure you can attach to these things. And that led me to see examples where certain investments in communities would not be made because the data weren't available. We simply could not get enough information to make a good prediction. And that really lit a fire under me to say, like, what can we do to improve the availability of data? These public resources have such importance, and how can we make sure that people like myself, but also for other industries and agencies could use them. And so that led me into working with the Census Bureau. We were working on a project where the Census Bureau was redesigning the ways in which they disseminate their information. And the Census Bureau sits within it has data on people, households, and the economy. It touches every part of our civic life. And this provided it was an opportunity that was too good to pass up, where how can I make a dent on this pet peeve of mine, which is we have such great information. It's just not reaching. And so that's what led me into government service. I spent 7 years there working on their dissemination team. And then from there, I transitioned over to GSA with the idea that what can we do to take some of the lessons learned from the Census Bureau, a statistical agency, and bring them on board to GSA. And it's just been a great move for me. I feel so empowered. This team is incredible to work with. GSA is such a vibrant organization with so many different angles to apply these types of problems, which is just fodder for any kind of data scientist. And so, yeah, it's a long-winded story, but basically it's just was doing a lot of research with public data, found myself being handicapped by the lack of availability of it, tried to fix the problem from the inside, and now I'm stuck because this mission is too exciting to leave. So
it certainly sounds like you ended up in the right place here at GSA. You know, we've had a lot of different people on the podcast from both inside GSA and outside, but I have to say, I think you have one of the coolest titles of any of the guests we've had. You are the Chief AI Officer as well as Chief Data Scientist for GSA. What does that even mean? And what does your day-to-day look like?
You know, it's funny. When I came on board, when I was originally coming on board, the role of Chief AI Officer didn't exist. It was responsible AI official. When I was coming in, that was the function. And it was really about making sure that we are managing our AI adoption responsibly, as the title really kind of professes. And that's an important thing to consider because AI, especially nowadays, has become very much the capabilities are such that it's relatively easy to do a lot of things, and these capabilities are powerful, they're profound, they have a broad base of application. It's not just in the data science world anymore. It's exploded out to every corner of your life, it seems like. And now we're reaching a point where it's much more about the editing, the self-editing of how we apply these technologies, and less about the capabilities of these technologies themselves. I saw a story the other day, a crew taking these smart glasses, and they chained a bunch of AI tools together so that these glasses could recognize people's faces and then identify who that person was, and then do a web crawl to gather more information about them and feed that back to the wearer of the glasses. I think that there is an editing question there. Is that something that we want? Rather, could we do it? And so things like that, I think, are really critical, especially in government, where we have a responsibility to use these technologies in a trustworthy and open way. The relationship of the AI officer role and the data scientist role, I think, is a natural one, because AI is nothing without our data and our data practices. AI is not new. It's been a big function of any kind of data science tool chain for years now. And so the idea that we had going into this was, well, how can we marry the critical infrastructure of our data with the enabling technology of AI and build a sustainable infrastructure for GSA to really benefit from the capabilities and build a strong foundation from which we can work. So our thinking was to keep these things as closely as possible, as close together as possible. And I think our day-to-days are largely driven by how can we enable the organization to adopt these technologies safely? What steps do we need to put into place from maybe an IT perspective, be that the scalable compute required to use this stuff, to the data and the data products that need to be used to drive them into creating more value, and then ultimately into into the use for data scientists or other practitioners. How do we build platforms that folks feel empowered to be creative and solve problems without having to fight technology or the data sets that really feed their work?
Well, I think the story you were telling there sort of flows naturally into this next question. Now, it's been about a year since the president released the Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy AI Executive Order. And in the story you were telling about AI glasses, it seems like to fall right in line. Like, yes, we can do it, but should we be doing it? So the question really is, what has GSA been working on this past year? What have we been doing?
Yeah, and so the things that we've been focusing on is setting strong policy groundwork so that our adoption of AI is effective, sustainable, and trustworthy. We know that these capabilities are there. It's a question of how we can convey that our use of it is as trustworthy as the EO mandates, if not exceeding those standards. And I think one of the things that I'm really happy about is that we have that leadership coming through and saying that these are the core principles that must be enforced across our federal complex to convey our maturity in using this technology, to demonstrate its efficacy, to provide recourse should these systems not behave in the ways in which they should, and mandating that we describe how we do that. The key actions that we took following the release of the executive order was to work closely with OMB to identify what are the specific actions that need to be established for our reporting of our use, of our risk mitigation factors that we're going to be applying to our use cases, how we report our use cases. And then once the M2410 instructional came out, it was all about us establishing the governance bodies and the processes required to do that in an operationalized setting, especially at scale. The scale of GSA being so broad, especially in the mission centers, it's really critical that we have a governance structure that can handle that variety. What we did was we established an AI governance board that's an executive level board that is designed to oversee the strategic aim of GSA in terms of how we want to adopt AI. What is our risk tolerance and profile for these types of use cases? And then ultimately identify where we should target and prioritize some AI adoption. Below that, we have a supporting team called the AI safety team. And this team is designed to adjudicate use cases as they come in. We wanted to make sure this was a grassroots effort where folks who identified workflows that could be enabled by an AI technology had a forum to propose that use case as a viable alternative to our current process. The AI safety team takes in these requests and assesses them for their risk profile, and makes sure that they are representative of the broad equities that GSA reflects. And so in both of these governing bodies, we had a very strategic aim of making sure that we had broad representation. It was not a technology board, one that would adjudicate whether or not the technology could do the thing, but really should it do the thing. And that's why we brought in a whole variety of folks from, we have CIO representation, but we have FAS representation, business line representation, PBS, CFO is involved. We have ethics involved, OGC is involved. We wanted to make sure that we had all eyes thinking about this from as diverse a perspective as possible to make sure that we're not missing stuff. Because again, it goes back to the question of is this the right adoption of this technology? Because we know it can, should it?
Well, it sounds like GSA is putting in a lot of work, trying to sort out the boundaries and set a framework for where we're going to do this. And I think that's a great step, right? It's enabling us to use these tools responsibly. But GSA was founded to create a more efficient government and to serve it as a whole. How do you see our work impacting all of government, right? What are we doing that's going to enable the rest of government to use these tools?
Yeah. This is something that I think we've been doing really well, and this is a partnership. One of the things that I want to stress is that um, the function of the chief AI officer is really not representative of the amount of capability or expertise we have in AI. And that's demonstrated by some of the outputs that have been that we've been releasing over the course of the year. We released our fast ITC procurement guidance for Gen AI, which was incredibly well received document, which helps procurement professionals understand how we are to approach procuring generative AI technology, since it does have nuance that needs to be addressed. In fact, that was also bolstered and supported by the release of M2418, which only further suggests the good work that FAS ITC did in developing that procurement guidance. We also have been leading the charge in the AI hiring surge. And Lewis and TTS have been absolutely instrumental in driving more AI talent into the federal workforce, be that through the hiring shared hiring authorities that have been put forward, along with the PIF program, all of the digital core efforts. We've seen a huge influx in the amount of applicants that have AI specialization that want to work for government. And this is really an important thing to shout out, is folks want to work on really mission critical, interesting problems. We, the federal government, have those problems, and we need to make sure that we provide a good work environment for folks to dig into those problems as much as possible. I think we're competitive in that space. Our mission is so interesting, and the work and the problem sets that can be worked through these technologies are incredible. And I would only just, shout out to the audience to make sure you take a look at some of those hiring authorities. And if you're, thinking about working for government, check them out. If you're hiring for government, check them out, because again, the more we can get more of this talent in here to collaboratively work these really sticky and interesting problems, the better we're all going to be served. So huge effort there. And also once you've joined the federal government, you have support. One of the things we have is the AI Community of Excellence, which has communities of practice where you can swap war stories, talk about what you're doing, what you can learn from others. There's a very clear AI tribe that is building up from this organic community of AI specialists, where you can collaborate with other folks, not just within your organization, but across the whole federal complex, which is again vast and has incredible problem sets to be explored.
I love that you mentioned the sort of workforce and hiring. It seems like every episode we have somebody on who's talking about people love doing impactful work. Government is here, right? That's one of the things about the work we do. So it's like every episode, somebody is on here talking about that very thing. And I think for me, one of the coolest things about GSA, talking about hiring and bringing in help, is that we're always having events where we're bringing in people looking for outside expertise. I seem to remember just a few months ago, we did something called an AI hackathon. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about that? Why did we do it? What did we get out of it? And break it down for our audience a little bit.
We wanted to explore what the future of our digital services would look like in a world where folks tend to interface with AI tools a little bit more directly than they do today. Think about here, like a premise we could say would be, if products like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, Anthropic, Claude's Anthropic, Anthropic's Claude, my apologies, become a first stop for a lot of folks, where I want to ask a question. I want to get some more information. I might want to take an action, if folks start to go to those tools a little bit more directly, um, they may not have a need to leave those tools. They may not have to say, it's not like a traditional search engine where you ask a question and you get a bunch of links and that link takes you to a place where the information could be then understood. These LLMs are delivering the information in a consumable way and then provide you follow up and an ability to take action. And so we were thinking, like, what would the world look like if folks started to use these tools more directly? And importantly, how does the federal government need to respond to this environmental shift? We all had a huge environmental shift when Google broke onto the scene and became the norm, the adoption. People designed their websites differently in response to the algorithm. Um, this moment we're in right now is, to me, similar. We have this potential functional generational shift where people's workflows fundamentally change because of the tooling available, and the content that's generated changes in response to the tooling available. And so we threw it on this hackathon because we wanted to explore this concept. What would others coming from outside the government think about how a federal website needs to look, act, behave, do in a world where people use ChatGPT as their first stop? Does the website need to look differently? Do we need to write it in a different way? Do we need to create new APIs that can interact directly with these LLMs? How do those APIs need to behave? There's a whole host of things we could do. And I think the idea of a hackathon gave us this flexibility and this open-mindedness for us to be on the receiving end of these good ideas.
Before we keep going, you used an acronym during that answer that I want to make sure our audience understands. What is LLM? What is it? What does that mean for people who don't follow tech and know what AI is?
Yeah, sorry, I should have caught myself. A large language model is it's a computational model that generates an output like text. It can translate content. It can perform tasks like natural language processing, sentiment analysis. And really what they are these really powerful models that allow for folks to have a conversation with a very large data set that lives in the background somewhere. Think about if you were able to train a model to emulate the speech and text that it found on the internet. That is effectively what these LLMs have become. These very, very large, very comprehensive means with which it can replicate human speech patterns. It can replicate a variety of different tasks.
Okay, I think that helps. And I want to go back now. When you were talking about the AI hackathon and how it tried to sort of reimagine how we would do this, right? And I think throughout history, you can pinpoint certain advancements that were what you would call disruptors. And that sort of seems like the moment we're at right now. So with telephones, they replaced telegrams, online shopping destroyed traditional retail, where even you can think about ride-sharing apps and what they did to the taxi industry, right? So I guess as you think about how things are changing and what AI is doing, the primary concern from a people perspective is, what does this mean for me? What do these tools mean for the workforce? Or is it just a matter of learning a new tool to do your job better and more efficiently?
Yeah, very much the latter. I think it's at a superficial level. Sometimes it's the messaging gets a little muddled, and there might be maybe too much fervor in the idea of how capable a lot of these tools are, in the sense that they can do entire things, processes from end to end, and it's basically hands off. We're not in that space. And it's important for folks to one, try out these tools, where you can. Get some practical experience with them, because these are functional tools that enable you to be more efficient and productive. And really, that's the framing that we're taking here. That we look at the literature, that's where the benefit is it helps you get going. It helps you move faster. It helps you be more efficient. It helps you focus on the things that you should be focusing on or that need your attention. And it can remove the mundane. It can remove the banal. It can remove the routine stuff from your workflow. And so the way in which we're approaching it is, one, this is a tool like any other. We want to make sure that people have access to these tools and can use them safely, and understand the risks of using these types of tools. Like any tool, there can be good and bad to it. So it's important that the training is there for folks to understand how to use them effectively. We also want to make sure that people, from a career development perspective, have access to these tools, because there's a norm happening amongst industry where folks have these tools and this is how they operate, and this is becoming a mode for doing business. And so to maintain our presence, we have an obligation to our team to make sure that they have access to this industry norm. But it also is important that we establish these processes, which I think is where government kind of will lead in a lot of respects, in terms of the very safe and trustworthy adoption of these tools. This is where, establishing guardrails of best usage patterns of behavior and applications for these tools really comes in. And that's where we have a really exciting dynamic with the team, where we're having conversations about the application of this in this workflow and how it works and where the human in the loop might reside, and what are the specific processes that we want folks to ask themselves as they start to think about employing these tools. And so there's a huge variety of different things that need to happen or that we are doing, from training to upskilling to technology acquisition, but then also in process development and best practice establishment. I think I'd also call out, the way in which we're adopting it is from a science perspective. If we look at things like login.gov, and our research with the equity study, which is trying to understand how certain technologies behave when tested against different socio-economic and demographic images. Do face matching softwares behave differently depending on what types of images it is looking at, is an important question, not just for GSA, but for the general federal workforce, as well as the industry in writ large. And so I think the leading through science and leading through our scientific inquiry to better understand how certain things behave and what you need to do to prevent bias and inequitable solutions from making their way into solutions that have a real impact on people's lives is an incredibly important function for GSA to lead forward with. And so I'm super proud with things like the equity study, which are operating in the open, publishing their work, and providing real benefit in a very timely manner to an important conversation, not only for our own benefit, but for others as well.
Well, it certainly sounds like things are moving in the right direction. Looking ahead, what comes next? Like, let's say over the next year, 2 years, what happens? Where does this go?
Yeah, we are making a focused investment into our data infrastructure for GSA. We are making a focused investment in our data infrastructure so that we can empower the collective workforce to ask creative questions of our data and use these in a sustainable way. We are productizing our data sets, our data assets, so that they can be understood by not only the analysts on the ground, but also these systems like LLMs, which require context and enough content for it to be understandable by these types of systems. It there's an interesting thing about with this new technology, we've found that for it to be understandable by these new systems, you oftentimes need to take a step back and consider how you can make your own internal data more human readable, because these systems are designed to act and understand content like people. And oftentimes when you look at your data, sometimes it's really jargon. Maybe it's just a bunch of codes. Maybe you have to go into a PDF that's like 100 pages long and find like that code book matched with this. And it's been really, really great for me because getting data into shape for people to use is really like my thing. That's what I really want to get done. And AI kind of helps me in that case, because the questions that an AI would have, these LLMs would have of the data sets, are the exact same things that people would ask. What does this code mean? Like, what is this column trying to tell me? All of that contextual information, the data labeling, is really helping us, the data practitioners, selfishly. It also helps these systems, and it helps us build more sustainable pathways. But we humanize our data to make it more legible and understandable for these machines. It's a very weird thing that has happened, and I'm grateful for it. Anything we can do to make our data more understandable, I'm down for, and I'll use LLMs if I have to, and that'll be something I'll use too. So what I hope to see in the future is a humanization of our stuff in a way that makes it more approachable, makes it easier to use. We consider how we can make people more empowered to make smarter, informed, and faster decisions that are more accurate, more precise.
Oh, that's a perfect way to end that. I can't say thank you enough for joining us today. I think our listeners are going to love the conversation. I think there was a lot there, and hopefully it was easy to understand. I feel like I just took a class into the world of AI, its risk, its benefits, and how we're going to keep using it into the future. So thanks for joining us. Well, that wraps up another episode of GSA Does That. A huge thank you to Zach for spending some time with us. With the world of AI growing every day, it's great to hear that GSA is working to ensure these tools are being used responsibly. Stay tuned for our next episode as we once again explore the world of government contracting and discuss the latest on transactional data reporting. If you've never heard of TDR, the goal is to help government make data-driven purchasing decisions. If you like what you hear or have something you want us to discuss on a future episode, don't hesitate to reach out. Our email address is gsadosesthat@gsa.gov. And remember to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms. I'm Max Tempora, filling in for Rob Trubia. GSA Does That is a production of the U.S. General Services Administration, Office of Strategic Communication.